Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to our April Peer Connection. Um, Today's call is an opportunity for all rounds to come together in lieu of our individual monthly update calls. So, majority of you might remember that we did two or three rounds at a time last year where we would convene and talk about different topics. And then we also had our peer-led peer-to-peer meeting as well, where we discussed topics of interest. And so this peer connection call kind of combines those two calls together. And so we'll have another one in July and then again in October. And just to give a brief overview of what we'll be going through today. So we have a featured guest who I'll let Audrey introduce in a moment. And so we'll have a data spotlight. And then we have another guest talking about fundraising insights and strategies. And then we'll go into breakout discussions and talk about fundraising and practice and what your strategies are and what's working, what's not working, and just learn from one another. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Audrey.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. We're so lucky today to be joined by Dr. Stephen Patrick. He's the chair of the Department of Health of Policy and Management at Emory University, Rollins School of Public Health. He's also the co-director of the Emory Health Services Research Center and a practicing neonatologist at Children's Hospital of Atlanta. Dr. Patrick leads the State of Child Health and Wellbeing in Georgia survey. In 2025, this survey gathered input from nearly 1,000 parents across the state on a wide range of child health and safety topics. And so Dr. Patrick is actually going to join us later in this year when the 2026 survey is ready to be shared at a lunch and learn. But he's come today to share more about data around food insecurity. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Patrick.
Well, hey everybody, it's great to be here and talk a little bit about our team's work. And I think one of the we poll on many issues. Thanks for putting the poll in the chat. But I think hunger and food insecurity is something that resonates with us so deeply, and certainly resonates with me as a pediatrician, and just the effects it can have, whether that's inability to pay attention in school, or the potential long-term effects it has. And so I'm going to present and focus a little bit on the data on food insecurity. I just have a few slides from our data, and then I think we have a little bit of time for questions. So let me pull up the slides. Can you guys see this okay? Yes? Good. All right. Awesome. Um, so here's kind of the shocking number, and this is from our 2026 data, that 1 in 3 Georgia families is food insecure. And so the way we ask these questions, we use a standardized USDA screener for food insecurity. Our survey is representative of Georgia families with children. So it uses data from the US Census so that of the 1,000 sample that we have, it truly is representative of Georgia parents. This year, we oversampled rural communities too, in part because last year we had in our sample a little bit of an oversample, a little bit of a higher sample in urban communities. But either way, as we do the statistics for this is what is representative of Georgia families with kids, a third with food insecurity. And if we drive a little bit deeper, here's how this breaks out. So food insecurity includes both low food security and very low food security. And this depth of very low food insecurity, these are people skipping meals. Very low food security is like you can't buy the type of foods that you want, and they collectively give that food insecurity definition. But this 1 in 5 families have very low food security, and that's not distributed evenly across the state of Georgia either. But this is, again, for me, I think is still sort of a challenging number. If we look a couple different places, we compare the overall state average the versus rural and urban communities. We see overall food insecurity still pretty high. It is higher in rural communities. There are a couple other groups, and I'll share some of them here. We see that food insecurity is higher among Black families, among Hispanic families, and among families who make less than $75,000 too. 59% of families have they've been forced to sort of change the way they buy food too. And so this is some of like, we asked a couple of questions, like, what have you done in response to food prices and other things like that? Many families are changing what they do. So about 65% said they've changed food types. About three-quarters are going to restaurants less. And then about 25% of parents are skipping meals. To me, this is really staggering. So about 1 in 4 Georgia parents are skipping meals. If we look at kind of what that means below that, only about 2% of kids are missing meals. And so this is parents doing what parents do. They're running interference for their kids, skipping meals so that food can be there for their kids. There is really widespread support about some things that we can do to help support Georgia's kids. And the one thing I'll leave you with is this. It's, Georgia parents, I don't know that parents much anywhere agree, almost 90% on anything. As a parent of two girls, right? They're kind of like, who agrees? Like 90% of people agreeing on one thing. This is pretty consistent last year to this year. 86% of Georgia parents support universal free meals in schools. And I think one thing that, a thread that we're pulling in many parts of our survey is just the importance of schools. And of course, we know this, right? I mean, as a pediatrician, most of the important pieces that happen from the families that I serve and the kids I serve happen outside the walls of a hospital and outside the walls of a doctor's office. It's really about schools and what happens at families. So if we sort of look at this overall, we have 1 in 3 families that are food insecure in Georgia. 1 in 4 rural families really hit that severe, very low food security. And then we have parents skipping meals. And I think we do have at least one of the potential solutions. And we can dive through some of the other data in the Q&A. Like we did have some questions on SNAP and beyond. But I just want to give a high level of data. I think one of the things we've also seen this year is churn in SNAP. We saw about half of people just that were enrolled in SNAP described some level of churn and losing coverage over the last year. So this is really just a brief look at the data, and I just wanted to get it as a place for us to start a conversation and have a dialogue. So look forward to chatting.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patrick. I'd love to open it up for folks in the call for any questions that you might have. Um, I know that our focus is mental and behavioral health and increasing the resources, but I know that there's a lot of connections between food insecurity and mental and behavioral health. One of the ones that come to my mind is just the stress that families are feeling when they are trying to deal with feeding themselves, their children, and their families, and how that can contribute to their mental well-being. Do folks in the call have any questions while we have Dr. Patrick?
Hey, Audrey, it's Rebecca Best, and I'm in the car, so I apologize. I'm not able to be on camera. But one of the things that we've been talking with some of the schools as we've tried to do outreach is just when there's a hungry belly, there's not the capacity to learn. And then oftentimes that's when we see negative classroom behaviors. So food insecurity has a direct connection to challenges that the classrooms face. And then schools are trying to fill this gap for families and stretching the resources that they have. So I don't know, that's more of a comment than a question, but that's just some of the feedback that we've gotten from some of the schools that we've interacted with.
Yeah, and back to that point, I mean, it's so much pressure on schools. I mean, hungry kids have a hard time learning. Like, we're sitting in a classroom and your stomach's growling. How much of inattention then happens is that, especially when we have this rate of food insecurity in Georgia. I think part of for me, this is a call towards more school support. One of the other issues that we're going to release here in a couple of weeks is parental support of mental health screenings and mental health supports in schools. That has been controversial from time to time. Doesn't appear to be controversial in Georgia. Most parents support this. So I think, as a kid who went to public school, and my kids go to public school, supporting our public schools as they deal with this, I think is just increasingly important.
Yeah.
I have a
Regina,
question.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, and maybe you mentioned this, and sorry, but do you have any projections about what will happen as SNAP is reduced further? And yeah,
In the survey, we saw that, among people that are on SNAP, about half had some disruption in the last year. There's a lot of worries what will happen with SNAP for folks who are aware of what happened with HR 1. HR 1 did a couple of things. It created new work requirements for parents who have kids 14 years or older. It also created new work requirements for children who aged out of foster care. And then the other piece is that it put a lot of administrative burden on states. So states, this is a big part of HR 1, a lot of things going back to states, whether it is, some of if you heard about the error rates in SNAP, how that's considered basically penalizing the states in the middle. So I think all of this leads to a place where there's a lot of concern about how this will play forward with work requirements, as well as just the administrative reporting from that. And the bigger picture is just how do states deal with that? How does Georgia's state government deal with that when we see increased pressure on SNAP and on Medicaid? And what will the state choose to do? Ultimately, the state has to have a balanced budget. And I think the worry is, will they choose to be less generous when it comes to SNAP? Will states start to fall away even from SNAP? That's a long-winded answer to say I don't have any good predictions, but we're worried about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not going to get any better.
It's not going to get better. And actually, I think this point for me, like the rallying cry a little bit around food insecurity, is just one of the things we look at. This is a solvable problem, and it's one where I think, you know, it's true in any community. It's true in communities of faith. It's true in like, how can we sort of work collectively towards the policy change that is there, but also what element can we do in our communities, supporting food banks, supporting schools, all of these pieces. The other thing I didn't present is on school debt. We have about 6% of Georgia kids with school debt, and 25% of them have $100 or more. So this broader thing of just making it easier for kids to eat in schools is important. And I think we have to support schools to do that.
Absolutely. Amanda, I see your hand is up.
Yes. Do they have any plans to increase the availability of land or opportunities for schools to be able to start planting food themselves? Maybe starting gardens, community gardens, or things like that to help address the food disparity issues?
Amy, I don't know the answer to that. I think there are certainly communities and areas where, that focus on gardening and focus on like I have a good friend who works in DC that, works in part on gardens and fresh foods. I would say a little bit of this is yes and because there is a piece of this that, that is part of a solution. I think another part of a solution is, you know, I think each of these parts, whether it's like, a church sponsoring to pay down student debt, whether it's the legislature focusing on universal free meals.
Yeah. And something that struck me about what you said is it is a solvable problem. And I think a part of that is highlighting the problem and also sharing this data. So I was wondering, can folks have access to your slides?
Yes, you can have access to the slides, and I'm going to put a link in the chat to the release of the data too. So give me
Wonderful.
one quick second. We can keep talking, but I'll give a
Yeah.
link to that.
Yes, perfect. Tara, I see your
Yes.
hands up.
Yes. So I was actually having a conversation with somebody this morning about this. And so this is just more of a statement. We were actually talking about the challenges related to the government websites, helping families maneuver through the application processes. You mentioned the high error rate. There has just been a lot of challenges related to that. I work closely with families trying to do both SNAP and maybe the CAP, so childcare. And it is a very robust, complex things for already stressed out parents to maneuver through. So I think help facilitating that. But one of the bigger things that I also see is when you have these income limits, where there's like childcare being provided and then some supplementation for groceries and things like that. If we have some parents that will go out and get a job, they will put them right above that income limit.
Yeah.
But if they now have to pay for childcare and the groceries, they cannot do it. So there's this like, window, or there's this like a area between where those income limits are and then like a gap that exists where getting the job and working and getting more income actually ends up with them being net negative because now they can't afford childcare. So then they can't keep their job and they're no longer getting some of this, the support that they needed. So that's like a big, I was just talking with somebody about that this morning. And I think that does highlight some of the challenges. But speaking really quickly to some of these community gardens. So we work closely in our community as well as some surrounding communities. And there have been challenges with some of the food that is distributed. I believe it comes to like the USDA. There was shortages on that where, I know in one location in Henry County, they were accustomed to getting, I think, 350 families that came through to get the boxes and what they were distributing. And they had enough after they had gone around, like maybe 106. And then also we have a food pantry in our community that serves between 400 and 500 families that is losing space because of a data center. So they're looking for facility. But we do have efforts ongoing to help implement. Somebody mentioned the community gardens, both to help provide some food, but also programming for families to teach them how maybe to plant things themselves as a means of trying to help some of the food insecurity. Because the county that we're actually in is Fayette County. And on paper, Fayette County is highly affluent. It looks like we are just doing really, really well. However, when you de-aggregate the data, especially looking at like the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, the overall as a community, I think it's something like 0.6. It's very, very low. However, when you de-aggregate data and look at some of the pockets, especially for historically, marginalized communities, that quadruples and it goes up so high. And so we struggle as a community with getting certain funding for things like the school system willing to pay for the lunches, or with the local, the county or municipality helping to maintain or provide supports for some of that stuff, because overall the picture looks really, really good. And so that kind of leaves us in a position where we're having to find some of these unique ways to kind of work together to figure out the food insecurity. But even just getting the station started in Fayette County is difficult because most people are like, that's not really a big thing here. You know what I mean? So I just kind of wanted to share that.
Yeah, I would say in this space, you have folks who make just enough that fall out. But I would also say your community depends on this too. Because, if you reach a certain threshold of free meals in a school district, then everyone has a free meal. So if you happen to be low income and not one of those communities, or like right on the margin there, you might fall out of this too. The system is complicated, too complicated. And to that point about our solutions, like, I don't think this is going to sound cliche, but it's totally true. Like, I don't know that there's a silver bullet, but there's silver buckshot, right? Like, this is where we have like multiple approaches. I do think fundamentally some of this is us deciding, because we did this before during COVID. We made meals free in schools and we had summer meals. We had this real focus on food insecurity through COVID. And I think we could do it again. It's something, to me, I think this is just so fundamental.
Mm-hmm. And then I do have one question. Is there a difference when it comes to the lunches and things? Does the school designation of being a Title I or Title II, does that play into additional funding for providing those meals? That's something I'm not really informed on.
I don't know the answer to that either.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
So we can look into that, Tara. Dr. Shannon, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to ask a question before we wrap up this section.
Yes, so just really quickly, thank you for sharing the state of child health and well-being. I just had a question. I saw that it said that 987 survey participants took part in being able to have the data for this. And I wondered if there was a breakdown of metropolitan Atlanta versus rural, or if you're able to dig into the data by those larger metropolitan Atlanta counties.
We can't, unfortunately. The sample's not big enough for us to identify a specific county. What we can do is we can break out by urban versus rural, and most of the urban or Atlanta, right? It's most of that versus rural communities. We can break out by race. We also offered in English and Spanish. We can break out by income too and education. So there are lots of ways we can do it. Breaking out by a specific county, unfortunately, the sample's not large enough for us to be able to do it.
Gotcha. And so you mentioned that you could do it. If you were able to do it, where would that information be found?
Could for county or could for?
For urban versus rural.
Yeah, I think we might have it on our website actually. And
Is it? Okay.
if not, I'm happy to give it to you because we have it. I mean, part of what we put out. The other thing is like when we put out the report, we're going to release like literally all the data. So you can look at if you want to ask like, and you can look at our last year's report because the data are actually pretty similar. Like food insecurity didn't change a lot from last year to this year, but you can look by urban, rural, you can look by race, you can look by, so you can sort of look at some of the crosstabs there to identify, some of the areas that are more affected.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
These are really great questions. I should have predicted that it was going to be a robust conversation. I just want to thank Dr. Patrick again for
Yeah, of
spending
course.
time with us in our meeting. So grateful for you sharing this and also coming to Lunch and Learn later this year to dive deeper. With that, we'll transition to our next piece. So Alex, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you, Dr. Patrick.
Of course. See y'all.
Okay, so our next portion of this call is featuring Stephanie Mann, our Resilient Northeast Georgia co-leader and vice president at the Athens Area Community Foundation, over strategy and operations. And she is going to give us some insight and strategies around fundraising. So Stephanie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. And I'm going to also share my screen. We have at the Community Foundation have built, oh goodness, here we go, have built this presentation that we've shared with other nonprofits really as just a big overview of some fundraising systems and practices that we feel like from a funder lens and as a fundraising entity lens that we have seen be really successful. And can really be adapted to size. So whether it's one person responsible for fundraising plus, or a whole team responsible for fundraising and all the other things we do, that these can really be adapted and applied. So I'll move fairly quickly so that we have a lot of time to talk with one another. But we're always happy to share slides or connect anytime. A quick just summary of our coalition, just so you know what we look like. As a community foundation, the Resilient Northeast Georgia is a fund at our community foundation, and it's part of our signature community leadership program that we're bringing to communities. We primarily partner with Family Connections in our region to be part of this coalition work and support their work in communities. We also offer a trauma-informed grant to have other partners engaging in this work by offering funding through a grant cycle. And then we really use this roadmap that's provided by Resilient Georgia and how we engage with the community beyond those ways. I'll start with some fundraising systems. We always find that it's really helpful to talk about what system are we in as we're fundraising. This report is one we go to every year. It's the Giving USA report, and you can see how many dollars are going into the community through philanthropy. A lot of times people think most of dollars are coming from corporations, but what we see every day is that the majority of giving is coming from individuals. It's coming from people that we have relationships with in community. And so we always like to highlight that the best way to fundraise is one-on-one with people a lot of times. And then also the system we're in, there are so many nonprofits and other groups that are all fundraising. So when you're looking at the dollars that are going out in community, this is where it's going. It's who we're trying to stand out with, work with collaboratively and fundraise with. So just an overview of that system that we're in. And then really the rest of the slides are focused on these three things: how we can build systems that support fundraising, how we can really prioritize fundraising, and how we can get more done without the stress that sometimes comes with fundraising. So the three things we like to highlight with systems is the top 20 relationships is a really good system. If you can identify who are the top 20 relationships, not necessarily donors. This can be community stakeholders, it can be prospective donors, and it can be current donors. But who are those 20 people to make sure you are stewarding well, you're communicating with, and you're building relationship with? And then how can you segment those different relationships into different categories to help create systems to communicate and engage with? And then how do you create team goals that really help you engage with those donors? So there's so many different systems you can do, but those are really three categories that we see systems working with. And we won't do this exercise now, but this would be a really great exercise to go back and do in your organization. Can you, off the top of your head, identify your top 5 to 10 relationships today? And then think about when the last time was you meaningfully engaged with those people. And then what's gotten in your way if you have not been meaningfully engaging with them. And then moving into how we prioritize. So one of the biggest and most helpful things is defining your audience. So who are you trying to communicate with? Who are you trying to fundraise with and build relationships with? At the Community Foundation, we have come up with 4 target audiences for our work. We see that as professional advisors, so CPAs, attorneys who are working with individuals on structuring giving in our community. We're working with our current donors who've trusted us with funds, prospective donors who we hope to open funds with, and then nonprofits who we work with every day. So when you can define your audiences, then you can target the way you communicate with them and the messages that really resonate with each of those audiences. And then we always have a fun rinse and repeat. When you find something that works, just rinse and repeat and don't overcomplicate what it is you're doing when you find a good system and a good message that resonates with your audience. And then these are some of the strategies that our team at the Community Foundation has implemented in terms of how we fundraise, how we build relationships with people, both with the Resilient Northeast Georgia work, but then also more broadly our work. One of the things that our CEO says a lot is this personally, how do we begin again? You know, in fundraising and anything with relationships, there are going to be times when we make mistakes, when we mess up, when we don't communicate the way we should, or when we make an error with a donor or with a big relationship. But how do we personally begin again with authenticity and not let that stop us from moving forward? And then one thing professionally that a lot of our team does is time blocking. So when we're looking at our calendar, we're specifically blocking an hour, 2 hours to look at those segments and those relationships that we need to meaningfully engage with to make sure we have time in our week and in our day to really meaningfully engage. And again, the rinse and repeat. When you find a system that works, when you find a way, the habits, the Atomic Habits is another book we read. So when you find those habits that really set you up for success, to rinse and repeat. And then imperfect action is another key phrase that our CEO leads with a lot, that in this community work and nonprofit work, a lot of times we're so scared to take that next step because we want it to be perfect before we go and do something. But we have found a lot of encouragement from taking imperfect action by not waiting for it to be totally perfect or totally planned out, but just making an authentic action in relationship happen. And so those are just 2 points that our team focuses on a lot. And then storytelling is such a huge component for fundraising. If you have not already seen the TED Talk, I think it's by Simon Sinek, but it's the Start With Why, and he goes over this golden circle. I would highly recommend watching that, both personally, but also with your team. Of so many, and what he talks about in that video is so many of the times when we're telling stories or we're inviting people into the work we do, we start with what we're doing, when we really should be starting with why. Why are we doing this work, and how does that then influence us inviting people in? And so it's just a really cool way to flip the script on how we're talking to people about the work in a way that really inspires them to get involved. And so for fundraising and storytelling, really leading with your why. Both internally and externally. So making sure your staff, your volunteers, if you have advisory boards or the larger coalition, really understanding that why and how it's building the team together. I think the Art of Coalition building training that you guys have put on for us really talks about this well, making sure everyone in this coalition really understands the why internally as we go out in community. And then that applies the same way as we're developing business relationships and fundraising relationships, leading with that why and knowing how to lead with that why. And then how do you actually share your story in fundraising? This fundraising cycle, starting with the blue dot at the top, begins with that identification. So going back to that list of 20 relationships. And then the qualification is really defining those audiences. Are they likely to give or volunteer? What are the ways that they are likely to engage? And then the others are the places that you can build stories depending on what stage. Are you trying to begin a building relationship at the beginning? Are you trying to make an ask? Or then are you trying to steward? All of these kind of work in a circle as you're fundraising and offer a really cool way to have different messages for each stage of building a fundraising relationship. And so there's so many trainings on each wheel or each part of this donor cycle that you could spend hours and hours learning on, but really being authentic with, in that cultivation, why do you hope this person has a relationship with your work? And then when you're asking someone to give, making sure you have a story and a message that's going to show what's the impact because you gave and because you're a part of this. And then constantly having that stewardship with gratitude and accountability to here's what you're making possible by giving. Is just a way to tee up how we are building fundraising relationships. And this is just some examples from the Community Foundation of how we're telling stories, both in community about what it is we do and how people can engage with us. And so, we're here in Athens, Georgia. And so we often show this picture and say, if we can support the Kirby Smart Family Foundation and their family giving, we can support almost anyone in community with great giving. And then for a program with Resilient Northeast Georgia, we've been able to tell stories about youth engaging in their own philanthropy in really cool ways and how donors can sponsor those youth philanthropy programs. And so when we're asking a donor to give, we're able to tell a story of a student who engaged in that program and how they're going to make that possible again. And then we often will tell stories of how we're able to guide strategic giving, where we can bring donors together for signature projects to invest in our community. So we always just have these stories teed up for any audience and any stage to be able to really authentically share the work we do and how people can work with our foundation. And then stewardship is probably the number one area that we always talk about in fundraising, because I think one thing when we talk to donors frequently as a community foundation staff, this is a piece that often is missing, that donors really crave, not, just simple gratitude, not necessarily huge, long impact reports, but just simple gratitude. And we quote this all the time, that relationships are primary and all else is derivative. And so really the relationships in this work are the primary asset we have in the work. And so how can we steward those relationships through a lens of gratitude is one of the things we see a lot and focus a lot on. And so I think, hopefully this quote and data point resonates with this group and the work that we're all doing together. To just show how gratitude is not only good for those receiving it, but it's really good for the people who are giving gratitude. And so some of the ways that we have incorporated gratitude and how we're stewarding donors is just really simple everyday things. Taking sensory kits to teachers with a thank you. We have a partnership with our local schools where we pay for a flower delivery service, and every month they bring us flowers and we just pick a donor to go give flowers to that day. And then a no ask holiday card, just a way to really share gratitude in the holiday season to donors, where not every mailing is tied to an ask, but a lot of it is just tied to deep gratitude for being a part of the work with us. And so I think one really simple strategy that so many of us can take is how do we close that gratitude gap by having daily, weekly habits. So you can see again a quote from that Atomic Habits. But how can we build in a weekly habit of text messages, emails, handwritten thank you notes to really just express gratitude as a way to steward so many of our fundraising relationships? This is just a fun meeting or picture from a meeting years ago when my kids were a lot smaller than they are now. But we start every single weekly staff meeting writing a thank you note. So all of our staff show up to a meeting knowing who in the last week do we want to share gratitude back with. It can be donors. A lot of times it is donors, or it can just be really good community partners. But we start every week with a handwritten thank you note as a way to build in that gratitude habit. And then the last couple of slides really are focusing on communication. So I think a lot of us think we're communicating really well to donors, both when we're trying to have someone become a donor of our work, but then also we think we've communicated really well in thanking them once they have been a donor. But I think a lot of times we think we're communicating a lot more than we are. And so another exercise that I think we're not going to do right now, but I think could be helpful going back is as you think about the donors throughout this cycle of the fundraising cycle, do you feel like you're communicating with your donors enough? And then which part of the cycle do you feel more challenging or easier to communicate with donors? And then really trying to think through what are those weekly habits and ways you can time block for the areas that are more challenging for you to find the time to do and communicate so that you know you're communicating. You don't just think that you're communicating well. So those are really the end of the slides, and hopefully can lead to more discussion around fundraising.
That's awesome. Such great information. Audrey, do we have a few minutes or do we need to go into? Okay, yeah, I think we have about 4-ish minutes to, if anyone has questions for Stephanie.
I have a question. So I feel like many of the coalitions have very strong relationships with their community foundation, but for folks who might not have relationships with their local community foundations, is there a way to start, or do you have any suggestions on how to develop further relationships?
Yeah, I think if community foundations are such a great place to be connected. So if you are, I would say just continue to be connected. Find the staff members that are really part of programming and I apologize. I don't know if that was my internet. But I think each community foundation is going to have a different staffing model. And so some have program or grant staff. Those are always really great staff to be engaged with to know when do they have grant cycles that you could apply for, that can know about your programs. And then some have donor side. So a lot of community foundations have donor advised funds where, for our community foundation, if we know of nonprofit work going on in the community and we know we have 10 donors that would really love to learn about that work, we want to make that connection between nonprofit and donor. So just making sure they know about the programs that are happening. If they have trainings for nonprofits attend, that's one way to really build relationships with staff is by showing up to the programming that they have too. So yeah, just identifying the right staff and building a relationship like you would any other donor.
It's fantastic. So let's see. There's something in the chat. Within, I think there is Renee. There is awareness, but I think we could build on it. Absolutely. So we'll continue to explore that. While we're in this section, is there any more questions for Stephanie, specifically?
Well, I
Oh,
just, so sorry. I could have said that differently, Audrey. I was just wondering, like at their network meetings, at the Community
oh,
Foundation network
okay.
meetings, is there active conversation about mental health and youth, and then therefore this statewide initiative that they could engage in and support? I'm sorry, I should have said it differently.
No way.
Yeah, all of the Georgia Community Foundations, we meet for an all-staff summit every 2 years. And then I know the CEOs meet more frequently, so I'm not sure what their meetings are on, but I would say that we share very frequently. So I would say there's definitely awareness, but if there's ever a community that you need help connecting to the right staff or need help maybe with awareness at that community foundation, you're welcome to reach out and we can help connect.
Yep.
Because we do have that.
It
network.
feels like, at least in our community, there's a lot of emphasis on like crisis problems, housing, food insecurity, that kind of thing, and little less about the upstream work, which is what this is all about. So that's why I was asking the question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, if we can make any connections, we're happy to.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a fabulous question, and sorry for misunderstanding. Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was amazing, and we'll be sure to share these slides and the resources from the call in a follow-up email later this week. And so now we're going to transition to the different section of our call. This is a combination of like the peer-to-peer calls and the cross coalition calls from last year. And one of the great things about those calls was the connections that folks made across cohorts. And so we're going to split you guys up into small groups in breakout rooms. And we have some optional guiding questions for you that are on topic because we talked about fundraising. So I'm going to drop that in the chat. So in your small groups, you can choose one or two of these questions, but I'm hoping that in the group, especially if you guys don't know each other, if there's someone new, that everyone takes a minute to introduce themselves, their name, their organization, the coalition that they represent. And you might want to assign a note taker who might want to write some responses. We'll have 5 minutes at the end to share up if anybody wants to share anything up from these conversations. And we will have 15 minutes in the breakout room, and then we'll come back together as a group. And again, I know that's a lot of questions, so feel free to pick the favorite questions that you have to answer within the group. But we just want you guys to have an opportunity to connect and learn from each other.
Are you ready
Alex,
for me?
did I
Yep.
leave anything out?
Nope. Just let me know when you're ready for me
Okay.
to open them.
Okay, so we're going to open the breakout rooms now. So I think these are just, some are note takers. Let's see.
Oh, hi, Lena. Are you not? I will assign you
see
to a
my
room.
breakout room, but I'm not sure where to look for it.
Okay, I'll resend. What room does it say?
I don't know. Where would I find it?
Okay, hold on one second. Let me see. You know what? I think you got kicked out at one point, so it might not have assigned you. I will assign you now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Maybe I'll move Jackie's iPhone to. Can we move them to their room?
Well, she's supposed to be in room 2, but she didn't join, so she didn't click the join button.
Oh. Judge Key, are you there? Oh, I think he's in the waiting room.
He has 2. I think he's
Oh,
on
there's
his both for some reason.
two. Okay. Oh, now I've put both Judge Keys in here with us.
Oh gosh. Okay.
So
Hi, Judge
I
Key.
kicked that thing back in. I don't know why I
Okay.
have two on, but
Should I remove the other one? Let's see.
What room were you in?
I have no idea.
Okay, I'm gonna assign you to room
Just send me
2.
anywhere.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Alex.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Judge Key.